with Dr. Harding Rogers. Today is May the 30th, 2006, and we are at his home on Landis Highway. And Dr. Rogers, we really appreciate you giving us an opportunity to interview you. We know that you grew up in Mooresville on Main Street. Your father had a furniture company, and we want you to just tell us about some of your experiences growing up in Mooresville.
Okay, be glad to. I was born in 1936 in Lawrence Hospital in Mooresville. Dr. Taylor was a physician that treated my mother. I was a middle child of 3. I have an older sister and a younger brother. I lived in Main Street, the house on Main Street, which was my grandfather's house. My mother and dad lived there after they were married. They never lived my mother never lived any other place but in that house. Early childhood memories of Main Street and the kids up and down Main Street. I had lots of friends. We played in my backyard mainly.
Who were some of those friends?
One was, comes to memory, was a boy named Albert Copeland. His father worked for Burlington Mills, and he had 2 sisters. We used to play with them too, Evelyn and Sarah Francis. There was another boy up the street named Jimmy McLaurin. His daddy was a contractor back in the 30s and 40s. There was a boy named Roger Cashin. Behind my house were Jimmy and Jerry Moore lived back there. Across the street in the old Troutman house, which was mainly rental then. Mr. Troutman had died, I believe. This is in the 40s. There was a guy lived there named R.C. Childers. He was a good friend. And then across the street there were a lot of alleys. That's an old name in Mooresville. And some of them are still living around Mooresville today.
Was there a little store on the corner?
Oh yeah, I shouldn't forget that. I spent half my time in front of that. But there was a little store called the First and Last Chance. I guess it was First Chance in, Last Chance out. It was run by a man named F.S. Honeycutt. He and his daughter May ran that store, and we'd go through all the couches in the house and get all the loose change we could every day, and go up there and buy us a candy. But our favorite was RC Cola and a pack of peanuts. And you got more for less price with an RC Cola, and we'd fill it full of peanuts and eat that. And play and sit out in front of that little store. It was a big oak tree and white sand. I don't know why that corner had sand on it. The whole, we would even fill up the bottles with sand and then have sand fights. Use the bottles to shake the sand down.
Which corner was that on, Hardy?
Let's see, that's going east. It would be the southeast corner, I guess. Coming out this way, well, that's really north. That would be north, I guess the northeast corner. 'Cause Main Street goes up and makes a big U.
It was a corner of Main Street and Statesville Avenue.
That's right.
And it's where the Port City Shopping Center is located right now.
Okay, where that little used to be a bank?
Yeah.
Right
Yeah,
there? Okay.
it's right on that corner.
Right where that bank was.
Okay.
Big oak tree, and right below it was Avery Craven House, which was a great big white house with a big front wide veranda porch all the way around it. He was one of the largest landowners in Ireland County, I understand, at that time. And over up the street, my uncle lived coming north out of Mooresville. He lived in the middle of the block.
Who was your uncle?
C.C. McNeely, Cy McNeely, and then on the corner of that same block was my other uncle, Roy McNeely. So that was all McNeely land in there. Well, it wasn't McNeely land, but they owned lots and houses in there. So that family was very close together. And then when my mother, of course, lived in my home place, and then she lived there, so all the McNeelys were right there together. All my cousins, well, there were quite a few McNeely girls. Uncle Roy had 2 girls, and Uncle Si had 3, plus a son. So we all grew up right there on Main Street. Statesville Avenue, which crossed Main Street right there, was not paved going east. West, it was paved because it was highway, must have been Highway 21 then. But going west towards the whole hospital, it was a dirt street. And it was a dirt street all during my childhood. I can remember the town, tickled me, I can remember the town oiling that street once every month, maybe twice a month. Poured this plain old used motor oil out there on the street, and now you get arrested for dumping motor oil in the environment. They covered the streets of Florida with motor oil for I don't know how. Church Street was, I'm not sure. I don't believe Church Street was paved when I was a kid. Church Street runs behind Main Street. Then Statesville was finally paved after I went to junior high school. That was in 1950. It was completely paved in 1949 or 50.
There was an upholstery shop somewhere on Main Street on one of the corners at Shorty Deaton, Floyd Deaton.
All right, after Mr. Honeycutt died, I don't know if Mr. Honeycutt owned that lot or not, but Floyd Deaton ran an upholstery shop there after that. Now that was in the probably 50s.
Okay. Now, which spot was that?
Same place, same upholstery
Okay.
shop was in that store.
Okay. That's what I thought.
Right. That store didn't have electric refrigerator. I had, I'm sure, refrigerator. It didn't either. It kept its meat and its drinks and milk cold by an ice block. And Mr. Honeycutt had a 300-pound block of ice in a big wooden box. I can remember jumping up on that thing and sliding the door open and getting a drink out of it. And he had bologna in there. It was just kind of a convenience store. It wasn't a full-service grocery store.
So it was the first and last, and then after that it was the upholstery shop.
That's right.
Okay.
But I can remember looking down in there at those drinks where it melted down in that block of ice, and you'd get one out and it'd be cold. But that was a time.
What about the corner right beside you where at one time was McLean Supermarket? What was it when you were a youngster?
It was a vacant lot when I was a youngster. That block had belonged to the ARP church. And they moved the old McLean house that was up there before my time. They moved it back halfway in the block, almost to the end of the block at Statesville. They just tore it down recently, the last 2 years it's been torn down.
Yeah.
But it originally was up on Main Street. Now I don't remember that, it was a vacant lot when I was there. And when I was a kid, it was usually just empty till when I was riding a bicycle. I remember riding bicycles. There was a used car lot there. I don't know who ran it, but we used to watch those guys polish those cars. But when I was real small, it was just empty. It was soaked in peas. We used to tunnel through the peas. Have tunnels in there. And one of my best friends back then was a guy named Buck Nail. I don't even know his real name, except Buck. It may be Buck. But he and my family were real good friends. He lived in the old McLean house in the second floor. Webb McLean and Hugh McLean's daddy and mother lived on the first floor. They lived there. And Webb McLean's daddy had a dog lot behind that place, and 4 great big old red bone hounds. And they'd howl at the moon. But that was growing up in a town. I can remember when I was young. Really remember when they would gin cotton. This was early 40s. And people still drove wagons and mules, a few of them. And you'd wake up one morning and look out in the street, and the whole street would be full of wagons and mules and trucks with cotton on it, picked cotton. There used to be a cotton gin down the street. I can't remember where that cotton gin was, but there was one down Main Street. And it's right in there where Old Hart's office used to be. There was a gin there, big tin building with a drive-through on it, and it'd suck that cotton up in that gin. But I can remember a horseman here on the street, all that back in those days, up and down that street.
You even got a horse buggy down there.
Yeah, I got a buggy too. I have a buggy that my daddy restored. He liked to restore things, and he bought it from a fellow named Coot Follett, who's an old Mooresville horse trader. Coot told him it had been used in the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus. That was back in the '40s. That was Coot's selling barn, I'm sure.
Now he lived back on Broad Street, didn't he?
Yes,
North
he had a
Broad
barn
Street.
a horse barn on Broad Street. But anyway, my dad took it and tore it completely apart. When I was a little boy, that's all I did was sand on that buggy. And he put it back together, and we had a little horse down at my grandmother's, and we'd go, he'd harness that horse up every Sunday afternoon. We'd get in that buggy and ride all over Mooresville. Ride all the way out to overhead bridge out there, all the way back. Mainly tried to stay on where roads were still sandy. It's hard on the horse's foot on paved street. But that was a lot of fun.
It's still in the basement.
You mentioned the Troutman house was a rental house. Were you ever in that house?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, can you tell us about it?
Sure, you go in the front door and there's a big living room. I didn't go in a lot of rooms, but there's a big living room on the right, another living room on the left. Then there was a dining room behind that, and then a kitchen way in the back. But all I remember is when you went in the front door, right before you go up these big steps, there was a hornet's nest that big that had been, I guess Mr. Troutman had it, somebody had given it to him. But it stayed in that hall all my life, as long as the house was there. And in the bottom of that house, there was a basement that would flood, and we'd go over there, and the guy who lived there was C.A. Childress. He and my brother and I would play. We'd make us little boats and play in that lake down there under that house. Behind that house was an overhead strung muscadine vine. Must have been 50 feet by 50 feet, or maybe larger. And you could look up through it. It's always cool under there. And see the muscadines growing. And then below that was a big barn, a big red barn. And they didn't like for us kids to play down around that barn, so we didn't go down there very much. That was interesting. And when that house was finally vacated, my dad tore it down. And it took all the doors, all the windows, well, mainly the doors and windows and mantels, a lot of the staircase, stair rail, and brought it out here and stored it. He and my mother had divided her estate, and she had gotten this farm as part of her estate. And he stored all that wood out here. And when he built these barns out here, he used the wood out of that Troutman house, and it was absolutely the finest wood in the world, because Troutmans were lumber dealers. Every piece of wood in there was heart pine, every piece. They're still in this barn down here, all the cribbing in there for everything is, since that wood was very old, he was afraid to put it in exterior use, so he used it inside his barns. Little barn out here is all framed in wood from that B.A. Troutman house. They used to have the stair runners out of it, made stiles across the fences, but that's all gone now.
Do you remember what year the house was torn down? Or approximately?
No, I couldn't be accurate on that. I left to go to college in 54. It was somewhere between around 54, 55. I was maybe around middle 50s.
Mm-hmm.
I may have still been in Mooresville, I'm not sure. But, somewhere around there. Now, he didn't take everything out of there, but a lot of the siding in there, paneling, there were some rooms that were paneled, all beady paneling and all. He used that in his barns out here somewhere. Has some still some doors and a couple of mantles in an old barn out here now that he took out of there.
Okay, let's think about some of the other people that lived along Main Street. If you were walking from your house towards town.
I can tell you who lived in every house. Right next door to me were two old maids named the Schulenbergers. They were characters. Two old maids, and here we were kids playing around their house, and they didn't know anything about children. But they were very nice, sweet ladies, and but how they lived, I'll never know. Neither one of them, to my knowledge, ever worked. But they may have. I just don't ever remember them being employed. Yet they had an income. They lived in that house till one of them died there. Mary died. Bess died there. Then they tore that house down, and Mary moved over in behind Hugh Sloop's place. Hugh Sloop had some apartments over on Iredell Avenue. She moved in there, and she was in her 80s, and she was raped and murdered in that place. She was in her 80s. Couldn't believe it. And they caught the guys who did it somewhere in Florida, Georgia or Florida. That was a tragedy. But anyway, they lived there. The next house down were the McGraws. May have been another house in between there. Yeah, there was a Murdoch house in there. You remember a man named Frosty Murdoch, Nell Murdoch, who married Leighton Horton.
He was an organist.
Yeah, Frosty was. And Nell was a secretary or worked for the Red Cross or something. I can't remember what she did. But they lived there. That was rental then. The Murdochs had all moved out then. And it may have been a McKnight house in there where Bud McKnight and his family was raised. And that may have been the McGraw house. It may have been the McKnight house at that time.
McGraw was a barber.
But I think Bud McKnight lived in that house, or there was a house in there that may have been the McKnights. All the McKnight girls and Bub and those boys were there. And on down the street was a Queen house. That's all I knew is Queen. It's still there. It's about the last house on Main Street beside the Milkers. And a good friend of mine named Roger Cashin. He was a kid we played with. He lived there. Then there was a little teeny brick house beside that. Next to that house was a wooden frame house, and wood-sided house that a lady named Willie Kilpatrick lived in. And she was kin to my mother. In fact, her dad was on the farm right out here across from Prospect Church. That's right across from the church is the old Kilpatrick farm. But after the Civil War, he moved into Mooresville. He was wounded, he was lame. And I don't know what he did in Mooresville, but he had several girls, but Willie was one of them that stayed in that place, lived there. And she worked for Dr. Taylor. She was his, well, I don't know whether she was a nurse or not, but she worked for Dr. Taylor for years. And my mother said she knew more history about Mooresville and who was who and who wasn't who and who was supposed to be who than anybody in Mooresville. But Willie kept her mouth shut. She never revealed any of that. But my mother was, Willie was an old maid and old. And that house had no heat in it. I mean, it had no, I don't know if it had heat, and it had a fireplace. It had no electricity because I remember going in and there were oil lamps still in that house when I was a kid. But Willie would come up to our house once a month or so, and my mother would help her take a bath. And my mother would also leave the back door unlocked. It was never locked at our house. And Willie would come up and go in and get her something to eat, whatever she wanted to. That's just the way my mother felt about her. And every Christmas, we'd always take her Christmas dinner down to her house. But she lived in that house until she passed away. I think the Melkers bought it. Then there was a little brick house where Albert Copeland lived, raised his family there. And then the next house was the Melker house. The Melkers still live there. Then you crossed a little street there called, what is that street? Institute. And on the corner then was the was a Lutheran church. And the next house was a manse, I think. Then there was a little small white house. I don't know who lived there. Then you went to a house that Jean Mallard lived. And the next piece of property was Miss Octie Brown's house. She owned a lot of land right in there. Her daughter was Mary Mallard. She's Mary Brown, but she married a Jean Mallard, and they had one daughter. And she ended up marrying Thomas Templeton, and they moved to Statesville. But anyway, the next house was Voyles' house, and that's where old Squire Voyles lived. He was dead by this time, but there was his sister and some of the Voyleses. I remember the reason I know exactly who they were, I'd walk right by all right going to the picture show every Saturday afternoon. You got 15 cents and got to go to the picture show downtown. Well, we knew who lived in every house because everybody was sitting out on the front porch, so they'd speak to you and you'd speak to them. And the Voyleses were there. And you went a little bit further, and Miss Cabin, whose husband ran Cabin Funeral Home, she lived in a house there. She'd be on the front porch fanning. She fanned all her life. Never saw her without a fan, you know. And there was several houses in between there. Some Smiths lived, and then there was a house my grandmother lived in, the Gudger house. And the next house was a little teeny house that was in my grandmother's father's estate. It's called a Davy Carr house. It was a house before Mooresville was incorporated in about 1865. He moved into Mooresville from a farm out here on the Linwood Road. And Pat Mayhew had an insurance office in there for years in that little house. And the next house was Sam Neal house. That's where Bill Neal lawyer here in town, was raised. And his dad was my mother's first cousin. So Bonte was his mother's name. But that was the Neal House, and then they had the post office. Then you were downtown to almost, you're down on the first block of downtown. But there were a lot of interesting people who lived on that street, and across the street on the other side, that was mostly industrial. There was a flour mill, Louisville flour mill. There was that gin. There was a Troutman furniture, lumberyard, but they made mainly they made chairs in there and stools. But there were also lumber merchants too. And across the street from maybe the Copeland's house was a little house called Mr. Caldwell lived there. He had 2 daughters, Bernie and Marge Neaton, and she had a sister named Bernie Howard. And Marge raised 2 boys. She married a fellow named Charlie Newton. And they raised 2 boys there. I knew those boys.
Joel and Larry.
Joel and Larry. I couldn't remember Larry's name. And they married local girls, I think, but they don't live here now. Then they moved up on Statesville Avenue. Marge did it after a while. That's about the neighborhood around Main Street.
Wasn't the ARP Church on Main Street at that time too?
Yeah.
Down closer to town.
When you get get around the curve in Main Street, on past the curve a little, the ARP Church was there. Matter of fact, I saw a photograph the other day. Somebody had it in my grandmother's front yard or backyard, and you can see the ARP Church across the street. Yeah.
And Cavan's funeral home was down there.
Across the street.
Across the street, yeah.
Where the bank is.
Okay, well now tell us about your father's business. What kind of business did he have?
He was a furniture merchant, and when he left Davidson in the 20s, I think he went to Davidson 1 or 2 years. He left, and for several years he and his brother worked for Old Southern Radio Corporation, which was owned WBT. Well, that was their call number, WBT. And they broadcast. My daddy always laughed that he couldn't ever pronounce those composers' names of those classical pieces of music. But they did that for a while, and his brother went to Harvard Business School, and Daddy became a salesman, sold clothes, traveled all over the place. It was about that time he was married by then, in the 20s. His brother came back and became a stockbroker. But Dad traveled in Mooresville for, he and some of those Mills traveled for some shirt company and clothing companies, and then he got out of believe it or not, he got out of traveling and got into electrical wiring. And when I was just old enough to remember, he owned down on Broad Street, somewhere in there near where the old Safety Chevrolet company was. He had a little store in there where he wired houses and sold lighting fixtures. I used to know the number. No, I think it was 36 was his telephone number. The number was on the side of his little truck. And he had guys that worked for him, like Harmon Gillespie. He started working in there, and some Emmett Marr worked in there. And a lot of people. Then he got out of that business and went into the radio. There weren't any manufactured radios. You bought crystal sets and everybody made their radio, or if you were electronically inclined, you could make a radio with a crystal set. And then Philco or RCA started making manufactured radio receivers. So he opened up with Pete Miller, who was a Mooresville native. He was Mr. H.C. Miller, who owned Miller Drug Company. He was Mr. H.C. Miller's son. And Pete and Daddy went into business down there where Blackwell Furniture Company eventually was. I think there's a History restaurant in that building now. But they opened up a store called a New Century Supply. And they sold radios all over this was beginning of the Depression then. They sold a few before the Depression, and they even had to sell them. People wanted radio back then, and they were selling them on credit. And Wolf he's talking about riding all over the country trying to get a couple bucks out of people that had bought a radio on credit. So they stayed in business quite a while. Pete was kind of notorious, so he was kind of hard to do business with. So he and my dad were great friends, and he finally said he talked to Mr. Miller and told him he just going to have to either buy Pete out or Pete was going to have to buy him out. That business wasn't as good as they thought it was. Anyway, he then decided he found a man that owned People Furniture Store. And my dad said he'd never been interested in the furniture business, except somehow he got talking to this man that owned the store. And I think the man's name was Peoples who owned it. But I'm not sure. It was just Peoples. Anyway, he and I don't know how he knew Ed Kipka except through the Methodist Church. They were both big families in the Methodist Church. But he and Ed Kipka went into partnership and bought this People's Furniture Store. And that was in the middle 30s. And they stayed in business till my dad left it to my brother. My brother sold it and they moved Belks. When Belks bought that lot in the middle of town, and then eventually the town bought it for the Citizen Center. But the store was right there on the corner there. So he sold furniture for all that time. My dad was a furniture merchant, but Ed liked to fish. Ed Kipka liked to fish and had a place on Mountain Island Lake, or not Mountain Island, whatever that lake is down here near Charlotte, before you get to the Lake Wiley. That Mountain Island? Ed would go fishing during the week, and sometimes on Saturdays, and then Daddy liked to farm. And we had another farm down the road here in Rowan County. And my dad spent all his time out there working on that farm. Well, who sold the furniture was but a man named Bill McPherson, who was an old Mooresville native, just like they were, and a man named Presley Morrison, who owned Morrison Plantation. Believe it or not, he worked in a furniture store. But he did. And that was some group. But it was downtown, right in the middle of town. Everybody that had retired and they all wandered through there during the day and kept up with all the
news.
fairs. And of course, the Methodist Church, they were both Methodists. So that was a big deal. My dad, we always wondered why he didn't join the Presbyterian Church, because my mother took all those kids and went to the Presbyterian Church. But his mother was a Methodist, and of course she was a widow. But he said he'd moved to the Presbyterian Church when she passed, and he did, but that was real late in life when that happened.
Harding, you haven't mentioned one thing that they did at Peoples that I guess was only the main place in town you went to have pictures framed.
Oh, yeah.
That was a big thing with them, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, when you just didn't sell furniture every day, somebody would come in, maybe have 4 or 5 good furniture customers or more a week, but big furniture like sofas and things like that. So they took the framing business as an income, and they really framed the pictures. They did all of Davidson College's framing, all the athletic department framing, plus anybody else. They had a big part of their store was just picture frames and mats and things like that. And Ed Kipker could do the frames, and my dad could do the frames, and Presley Morrison could do the frame. There were 3 people framing it. When somebody was doing something else, there was always a frame to be made and mounted. They framed a lot of pictures there over 20 or 30 years.
Talk to us about another store downtown, Mayhew and McNeely. Now, was it Si McNeely was your
My
mother's brother? Yeah.
Well, my grandfather was born here. His name was D.K., David Kilpatrick McNeely. He was born here, and a week or 2 after he was born, his mother died, and she had inherited this farm. No, this was his farm. He was born here. His daddy owned this farm. Then his wife died during my grandfather's childbirth. Well, the wife, his mother, was Kilpatrick. So he inherited by birthright that farm too. That's how we own 2 farms. But he moved to his dad after his wife died here. He moved with his son to Mooresville. And he became the postmaster of Mooresville and some other things. But he, with his brother, John T. McNeely, formed McNeely's Livery Stable, which is right on the corner where Gabriel's store is right now. There was a livery stable there. And these guys, this was right after the Civil War, 1865 to 68. Mooresville didn't incorporate till 1873. This was before then. They moved into Mooresville and ran the livery stable. Bird was his name was Burgess McNeely, and my grandfather's dad's name was Cyrus McNeely, C.K. McNeely, I think. There's a lot of C.K.s and D.K.s. Anyway, so they lived in Mooresville. Then he married my grandmother and had my grandfather. But in Mooresville, eventually my grandfather got into the livery and grocery business, mainly the grocery business. And he was he owned part of, had some stock in the old Mooresville flour mill, and had a lot of stock in the old Dixie cotton mill up here in Cascades. And when the Depression hit, it really hit them hard. But anyway, he stayed in the furniture business that was called McNeely's for a while, and then he went into partnership with a man named Les Mayhew. Now, I know very little about that partnership, but it was called Mayhew McNeely, and they ran livery and groceries. And you see a picture of a lot of Civil War veterans and the family. They'll be in front of that store. because that's where a lot of these people went. The McNeelys were all in the war. Anyway, my Uncle Si ended up owning or running that store. He stayed with his father in business there, and he just assumed the ownership of that store. He had a brother, my Uncle Roy, who went to Duke and came back and worked at the Dixie Mill up in Old Cascade Mill. And when Si looked after these farms, they stayed in his father's estate. His father died in '33. The estate wasn't settled till probably 1995. They just couldn't settle it, or they wouldn't. And I mean, there was no contention among the family at all. They just, well, we gotta hold on to it. They didn't sell anything. They didn't do anything with it. Till finally, they finally divided the property up, and then the buildings downtown. My Uncle Si owned that building he was in, and my Uncle Roy owned the building next to it. All three heirs, my mother and my Uncle Si and Uncle Roy owned one building, and then Uncle Roy owned the top of another building down there. There were three big buildings in the center of town.
Now, I want you to clarify where those buildings were, because you talked about that the livery was on the corner, but where were those buildings? Were they?
You know where the depot is, they were, you come up from the depot, there was 1, 2, 3 buildings in there up past John Mackett's son.
Mhm.
The next building was Mayhew McNeely building. The next building was my uncle's building, C.C. McNeely. I did own, though, during the 50s, the A&P company rented that store when there was an A&P in Mooresville, the first original A&P. And then the next store was an office building on above and part of the A&P below. There were 3 buildings that were in that.
So they were all really right in the center of town, like you said.
Right downtown.
I know my folks, my mom traded some in the 40s at Mayhew and McNeely, and we'd see your mom up there. You remember that? That was an old-fashioned store.
Oh, yeah.
You'd go in the grocery store, and on the left, I remember they'd have like cereal and stuff stacked up on the real high up. You remember how they, if you wanted a box of cereal, do you remember how they got it?
Yeah, I don't remember that.
Had a long stick with a hook on it. They'd just go over there and flip it down, and fall down, and catch it. had what, hook cheese, and
Oh, yeah.
old pairs, big old set of scales in the back. My brother and I'd like to go back there and weigh.
Mm-hmm.
I bet you did too.
Had grain back there.
Yeah.
Molasses back there, a molasses barrel back there. They had a lot of coolers along one wall back in there too.
Yeah.
And you see a lot of Presbyterians in there. They were in the Presbyterian church. You'd see Dick Johnson in there, and you'd see lots of guys in there that were Presbyterians.
And part of that store was a I guess you'd call it a dry goods store.
Yeah. Kind of Les Mayhew. I'm not too keen on Les his history, but he and my uncle were in business together, and I don't know whether he and my grandfather were in business together or not. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
But Les kind of stayed over. He was a real quiet man, I thought. Or maybe he just didn't like us kids running all over the store all the time. But he didn't say much. But he was in the church too. He was in the Presbyterian church. I don't remember him much,
Yeah.
but I remember his name. And, anyway, that store was there a long time, and the thing about that was during the Depression. It's hard to do, but they handle credit. I can remember my Uncle Si being back there going over his book, but people didn't have anything and they had to eat, so they extended a lot of credit. Whether he got that back or not, my mother and my part of that family didn't have anything to do with that business. But I'm sure that they kept a lot of people eating during the Depression when there wasn't any work. At least that's what my dad said.
You've talked a lot about your mother, and I remember that your mother was a teacher at Parkview School.
Right.
She taught 3rd grade.
She taught for 10 years. Well, she taught 10 to 12 years, and then, but that was mainly up at Shepherd's. Then she quit and had her kids, and when I went into 1st grade, I was 5 and a half. She went back to teaching and taught for 20 years, 22. So she taught all her life. Retired at 62. And I wasn't sure she wanted to do that, but we thought that'd be the best for her to do. But she loved that school, and she loved Parkview School. She taught up there for the last 20 years. Get up in the morning, if that old Buick wouldn't start, I could hear those high heels clacking up the streets, walking up to Parkview School. To get to school on time. She went through she went through 3 or 4 principals at Parkview School.
I imagine she went through 3 or 4 generations of families, too.
Oh, yeah, sure. A lot of people come with me, oh, yeah, your mom taught my daddy. But, I never heard her say one bad thing about a principal. And not one bad thing about the administration of the school. Now, she worked there for 30 years. But my mother never said bad things about anybody. But even at home, in a family, she'd have had a reprimand from her boss or something. She never did bring it home. She kept her mouth shut, and she had a high praise for every principal in that she had. I can remember a guy's named Warlick. Oh boy, he scared you. That's when I was at Parkview too. And after him was a Lyerly. Hugh Lyerly. He had a daughter named Diane Lyerly. You remember her, how she about your age.
Darlene.
Daily.
Daleen. I think we'd get it right.
She married Gudger down here. Then there was a Pfeiffer. He was there a long time. And I don't know who was there after him. He died, I think, while she was still teaching. Mr. Pfeiffer did. But she really enjoyed teaching the 3rd grade. In fact, she taught me in she was teaching there, and when I got to be where I was going to go into the 6th grade, she was teaching combination 5th and 6th then. And for some reason that I never knew, she didn't care for the teacher teaching this full 6th grade. So she promised and made all kind of promises to that principal to put me in her combination class. And my mother taught me in the 5th grade, or 6th grade, one of them. That's the hardest school year I ever had. I really had to walk the chalk line. But she didn't like that other teacher for some reason. Or she was kind of protective and never put a lot of parameters on any of us kids. Maybe my sister, not us boys. So maybe she just wanted to watch out and make sure I did all right. I don't know why she did that, but she did.
So you went away to college and you became a dentist, and then you came back to Mooresville to practice?
Right.
But then
I went to Davidson and then graduated from Davidson and then went right into dental school. 2 of the greatest surprises in my life were one being accepted to Davidson College, and the second one was even more than that was being accepted to dental school. I just didn't think I had. Those were big surprises for me. And, but I did fine. And after I graduated from dental school, I was married by then. Went in the Navy, thinking I was going to sail overseas, and ended up at Parris Island, South Carolina, which was an experience in itself. You'd think that would be terrible duty if you were a Marine recruit. It is terrible duty. That's the Marine Corps training camp on the East Coast. But they had 40 dentists. This was right in the beginning of the Vietnam War. And they usually ran through about 8,000 or 9,000 troops. A training session at Parris Island during the Vietnam War. And when I was there, they were running 13 to 14,000 troops through there. They were bringing them out of boot camp, and they'd cut boot camp back from, I've forgotten. They'd cut it back 2 or 3 weeks. Wanted to get the troops to go to to Vietnam. But with 40 dentists, you learned all there was to know about dentistry and how other dentists did it. At Chapel Hill, they were the elite dental school in the 50s and early 60s. So we thought we were the greatest dentists in the world. You know, nobody could practice dentistry like a Chapel Hill graduate could. We were the #1 dental school in the nation. Well, you get in there with 40 dentists from different schools. There have been 20 dental schools represented there, and all you got to do is walk around and watch what somebody else is doing, or you see his work after he's already worked on a patient. You'll see that patient again. You can look at that dentist's work, and they marvel at it or criticize it, mainly criticize it. But you begin to see what other schools are like and learn how to, then you go talk to those guys. Well, how'd you do that? Or how y'all different from the way we did? That was a real learning experience for me. And then I had some good officers above me. Had a Commander Prince who ran the oral surgery department at PI. And he liked Carolina Southern boys. He was from Emory. So he kind of took me under his wing, and I took a lot of teeth out at Parris Island. As a matter of fact, I had a callus right there. Struck teeth all day long. But it was a learning experience. Break them off. I broke one off, and you'd go get him to help you teach you. But dental school, you weren't in oral surgery long enough to learn how to take out busted up roots and broken off roots, and you just had to learn that on your own by experience. Well, in the Navy, that was great experience right there. We get a bunch of recruits out of West Virginia. They didn't even know what a down chair was. They'd never even been in it. I had one couldn't get in it. He got in it backwards. And that's the truth. That's not a lie. That's the truth. So we did a lot of. I really learned a lot. We'd line them up out. You bring them in and examine them. They'd have a whole platoon, and somebody had already condemned the teeth. You'd take 15 guys and bring the first one in and numb him and send him out to the end of the line, and you inject all the rest of them. And then by the time you got them all injected, that guy was ready to, he was anesthetized. So you bring him back in, he wasn't passed out, and work on him. That was someplace, but it was a learning experience. And then I came back home, and when I came to Morsel, they didn't need any dentists. In 1962, they had 8 dentists here. Morsel only had 9, maybe 10,000 people then. The lake had already been built, but hadn't developed. Now I guess there are 40 dentists in Mooresville, maybe. I don't even know how many. I haven't counted. But they didn't even need then. We had dentists like Norman Scholler, even Dr. Trivet. He was fairly aged then, but he was still practicing dentistry. Dr. Claude Boyles was still practicing dentistry. In fact, I've got he gave me some of his tools. Boris Brawley was still practicing dentistry. He was mayor of Mooresville. He practiced, I was here about 5 or 8 years, and then he ended his practice. Then Worth Bridges was here. Bob Gray was here. There were lots of dentists in Mooresville. I wasn't neat, so I started out pretty rough, but I finally built a practice and made a living, and enjoyed every minute of it.
Albert, you got any more questions?
Yeah, let me change the subject a bit. You mentioned you were married when you were in service. Tell us, let's talk about golf course. Tell us your wife's father. When approximately when did he come to Mooresville, and what did he have to do with the golf course?
Well, I was in the, I remember one time we were riding around in the car, and I was maybe just beginning to be a teenager. We rode out and they were building the Mooresville golf course out here. And we rode through there and around the golf course that you could drive around and see, and it was all brown dirt. And my daddy says they're building a new golf course out here, and my mother's first cousin was Clayton Davison's wife, Sis Davison. And he was kind of in charge of that. So they had talked and they knew a little about it. And my daddy said, there's a guy from Mount Morton going to build this golf course. And said, his name's Will Mott. And said, he's got 2 good-looking daughters, I hear. I remember he said that in the car when we were driving around. So anyway, that was about, I don't know, maybe 1950. Not sure. Maybe 48. He moved from Mount Morton. He had a big farm in Mount Morton and a big old historic house. There's a picture of it there. It's still there. Bellows Companies owns it now. But Mr. Mott moved his family up to Mooresville on the golf course, and they had a clubhouse with the club part of it was in front, and the back end of the clubhouse was a family residence, 2 or 3 bedrooms and a kitchen and baths in the back. And the Mott family lived there while he built the golf course. And those girls entered the Mooresville school. I guess they would have come to Mooresville school anyway from Mount Morton back then. We gone to Davison then. So he built the golf course, and then they lived there till maybe 1960, 61, 62. And I met my wife, and who was a Mott, Peggy Mott. I met her in the 7th grade. 7th or 8th grade. And then I kind of dated her some in the 9th grade and some in the 10th grade, and went steady all in the 11th and 12th grade. Went steady all during college, and then finally married her. And so I've known her all my life. I've known her as long as I've known anybody. And what's so good about it is I'm still married to her, and we still love each other to death. But anyway, her dad built that golf course, and then ran the maintenance. He was a greenskeeper there till he retired in the 60s.
Yeah, I doubt many people now know how the golf course was started, who actually built it, and that family lived in the old clubhouse.
Yeah. The mill built it, which was really something. That was Mooresville Mills too, I believe. It wasn't Burlington. It was owned by the stockholders of Mooresville Mills. And they built it as a recreation for the town and mill people in the town. But now that was a real service to the community to build that little golf course. You just could, especially in the late 40s and early 50s, there just wasn't that much community service done by corporate America then. Or maybe it was and we just didn't know about it, but I thought that was really good that they did that. I wanted to say something. I've been thinking for 2 or 3 weeks since y'all approached me to do this interview that what I would say. And actually we've talked about most of everything I've thought about. I wanted to say something about some of the men in Mooresville. As I grew up from the 30s through the 50s that seemed impressive to me, or who were talked about around my family dining table, or my dad's mother and friends and conversations. I want to talk about some of those leaders in Mooresville, if you could. And then I think one of the most outstanding men I remember in Mooresville was Robert Holzhauser. He later on in life he was a real patriarch in Mooresville in his latter years in our church, especially in the church. He was a devout Christian man, lived it and breathed it, but he was also a shrewd businessman, but also mayor of Mooresville and civic minded, and had a wonderful family that he raised here too. So, and he was, as I said, a mayor of Mooresville at one time, and I always admired him. Roy Troutman was another man who was very, very civic minded, smart. Roy K. McNeely, nobody remembers him. He died in 1948. My dad said instead of naming the auditorium over at senior high school the Roland R. Morgan Auditorium, it ought to have been named the Roy K. McNeely Auditorium. For he was instrumental in the setting up and development of the Mooresville school system as a tax levying institution, one of the few in the state. I remember he was also a big Mason. I found out as being a Mason, which I'm proud to say that I am, that I was looking at the past grandmasters or lodge masters of Mason, that he was, during the war, he was for 3 years, he was the lodge president, the equivalent of the lodge president, Mason speak. And I guess that was because there weren't any recruits in Masonry then. Everybody was at war. So I remember him. I knew people like Leroy Canet, Johnny Matheson, Mary Lee Beatty, Carol Beatty's, Mary Lee and Carol Beatty. He was mayor of Mooresville one time. I knew them real well. Or heard people talk about them. I remember people like Bill Neal, the lawyer, Bill Pope, the lawyer, Presley Brawley, the lawyer. I remember when all of them came back to Mooresville. But I also remember Mr. Z.V. Turlington. I remember him real well. I remember Mr. Sideback, who sat in the church behind me, in the pew behind me, and I could hear his rosary beads the whole during the service. He's still a Catholic, but there wasn't a Catholic church in Mooresville then. So he would play his rosary beads and his prayers. But I can hear him. I can hear those beads clicking in that service. But I remember him. I remember Dick Johnson and his brother Hal Johnson and their daddy. I remember him. Remember their stepmother. She had a little horn she wore. listen, I remember people like that. Wilson Brantley, I remember him. He was a big leader in our church. So there were a lot of men I've been thinking about since y'all wanted to interview me, and I like to mention those names. I want to mention Presley. I mentioned Presley Morrison's name. That was a tremendous family, and hard-working farmer family. But his dad, to my knowledge, his dad traded land all over the Catawba River Valley from here to above Troutman, and swapped and traded land till he was at one time a very wealthy landowner. And also not just out where they built this Morrison Plantation Station. Now do you remember one of the peninsulas up on Lake Norman's called Penicillin Point? That belonged to the Morrison family. So he owned a lot of lake property that you just never people will never understand how big a landowner he was. And Presley, his son, who worked for my dad for years before the war, went to the war, came back and walked right back in the store and ordered jobs. He was a veteran. Right back in there and got a job and stayed in there till the furniture business and the store just faded. Then he left and went to work for Duke Power. Worked for them 15 years. So he was a conscientious man too. But I just thought I'd mention that. I remember your daddy, great big guy, big Republican. Him, oh, that was hot in town, that brawly Republican bunch out there. Oh, he used to talk about them, my daddy says, boy, you can smell them Republicans.
Oh, me.
That was bad.
Oh, well, anything else?
Fine.
Okay, well, we certainly do appreciate this. You brought back a lot of fond memories from Mooresville.
Yeah.
And we appreciate you sharing them with us. Thank you.